A very good morning, put on your bonnets and your bells and welcome to a folkishly tinged Saturday Live as we meet a Morris dancer come Morris milliner.
Bonnets and bells too, sort of, for filmmaker Gurinder Chadha of Bend It Like Beckham fame, continuing her exploration of Britain and India's intertwined stories, this time in 18th century Delhi. Oh. And Gurinder, does this count as a surprising hobby, this one?
Well, I don't have much time for hobbies, but when I was younger, I used to be a DJ, in fact, at university. And before that, when I was really young, before your parents weren't probably twinkles in their parents' eyes, I used to sit in my room and take cassettes. I had a cassette player, and I used to pretend to be a DJ and, and sort of put songs together. I think a lot of people did, right?
What kind of things?
I remember one of the tracks, was Gene Pitney's Something's Gotten Hold of My Heart. And I remember playing that. And
how does that go?
Something's gotten hold of my heart. And I remember my mum coming in when I was doing the intro, and I was sort of saying, now we go back all the way to America and all this. And he's playing, and my mum comes in and goes, Chal roti khana, aloo gobi tyaar hai. And I'm going, Mum, I'll be the DJ. And then at university I did it, and now when I'm on set, that's my big thing. I have a speaker with me and I have a microphone, dangerous. And whenever the crew and the cast, everyone's feeling hot and tired and exhausted, I always put records on and
so you
dance.
have a kind of mood-altering playlist for when you're working?
I do, yes.
Good idea.
I have robust music. We shot Beecham House, a lot of that in forts, and so then I'd put Les Mis on, and when I'd go, one day more, trying to rally everyone. And then I had a big Indian crew, and then I'd put Bollywood songs on, and I'd go...
I'm so glad you said that, because next to your name here it says Gurinder hobbies, and it says brackets hot tub. So that could take us somewhere completely different.
Hold that thought. We'll get to the hot tub. Gurinder Chadha grew up in Southall, the child of Sikh immigrants from Kenya, worked for the BBC, became a filmmaker and broke through with Bargee on the Beach and Bend It Like Beckham, a brilliantly fresh vision of Anglo-Indian life at the British and contemporary end of that long and ongoing relationship. A bit like this sentence. Her film Viceroy's House looked at that relationship around the time of partition in India, and her new series for ITV, Beecham House, goes back to the beginning of that story, just about the end of the 18th century, in a household in Delhi, or just outside Delhi, of masters and servants. It's a very interesting exploration, Gurinder, because you kind of start off in the contemporary, and then you sort of worked your way back through that long and fascinating history, and now you're practically at the beginning in the 18th century. Not quite the beginning, but the bit where kind of British and French interests in India get locked.
Yes, and it's a period that not many people know anything about, and that's what fascinated me. The reason it's 1795 is because the Warren Hastings trial has been happening in England, and he's just been acquitted. And Warren Hastings was the ex-Governor General of the East India Company, who was being taken to task for sort of misdoings. And that's the kind of backbone of our story. Our lead character, John Beecham, used to work for him. And what I didn't realise was actually India at that time was the ground to continue the great rivalry and war between Britain and France. And what was happening was the Mughal Empire was on the wane, the Mughal dynasties that had ruled India for hundreds of years, and standing by were the Indian Maharajas, both Hindu and Muslim. They were sort of thinking, okay, this is our time. The British East India Company were thinking, well, this is our time. And of course you had the French East India Company going, alors, it's our time, except that for the French, there was a revolution going on back at home, so they didn't really have a government pushing them, so all their generals were leaving and trying to get jobs everywhere else. Amazing time I didn't know about.
It's a continuation of war by other means, in a way, isn't it? What's happening in India. And of course, what's also happening is that encounter between Britons and Indians. And again, that's a fascinating and long story. And lots of that extraordinary volatile background is sort of played out in the domestic sphere. Relationship between masters and servants, between whites and non-whites. It's a very dramatic, rich in drama.
Yes, well, there's a lot of conflict, which you need for drama, but there's also a lot of emotion. And one of the things that I think is amazing is the fact that, Britain and the British have this great longing for India and relationship with India, But some people, feel that our relationship with India just sort of came in the 60s and 70s when people got off planes, And I wanted to show that actually, in the series, I show that relationship actually started 300, 400 years ago. Actually, it was Elizabeth I that first gave the charter to the East India Company to go out there and start trading. And so a lot of the trade of the East India Company, a lot of the wealth came out of India to build Britain. And I'm not saying that pejoratively necessarily, I'm just saying be informed that the fact that I'm here and my parents are here is because of what happened with Britain 300 years ago.
And also what's happening is it's another thing that you kind of have a very sensitive ear for, is the kind of relationship between those with power and those without power, but in a sort of the upstairs downstairs kind of way. I think Mark Lawson described what you do sometimes as chadaptations, which I quite like. but you do think things like upstairs downstairs or Downton Abbey, you kind of get the dramatic energy in that and turn it to look into this surprising place.
Well, what I try and do is reach as many people as possible. Yeah. That's always my thing, because everyone said to me, I'm small, I'm a minority, I'm Indian, I'm a woman, la, 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 la. It's small. My audience is small and my stories are small, and so I go out to say, well, actually they're not. And so that's why the way I conceive stories is always to be as big as possible and have as millions of people around the world watching them as possible. And I think that what that does is allows me to be, deft, if you like, with the whole Downton thing, because that was very popular. But when you see the show, yes, that's your way in, but it's very different to Downton.
Also, it's epic, isn't it? Wonderful locations. I know you've had some issues about the suitability of horses available for filming in India.
Yes.
Because they tend to be, polo ponies.
Polo ponies, exactly. So they don't really listen to people like me, going, now you can trot, They are very... they're also, I didn't realise this, is that polo horses and horses in general are very emotional. And if you separate... Emotional. If we had two horses... And we separated them. One horse pulled one carriage, the other pulled one carriage. And in the shot, one was over on this side of a house and the other was on the other side. And throughout the whole scene, they just kept neighing at each other because they wanted to be next to each other. I didn't realise that. And I said, well, put the horses together because we're not getting any sound here.
You also must have been a nightmare for your location scouts, because I understand that the principal location you changed within about 5 minutes of starting principal photography.
Don't talk about that.
No, please talk about that. Tell us about it.
Ruining the illusion. No, you're right. We went to India several times to find Beecham House, and I was shown lots of places, and I kept going, nah, not big enough, no, not Indian enough, nah, not this, not that, the other. Also, not a nice enough hotel nearby for me to stay in. And then we decided to go for this one in Bharatpur, and then as we got to Jaipur and we were about to start shooting, we all realised, God, Bharatpur was like 4 hours away. How are we ever going to manage that? And so one of my team, 2 of them actually went for dinner in this Italian restaurant, and right next to it was this big hotel, and they said, we've just seen this hotel, we think you should come and see it. And I went, and it was actually the first location we ever saw that I rejected, but it was right next to where we were staying in Jaipur. I walked in, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. And what was incredible, and this is why I always believe God works in mysterious ways with filming, with casting, with everything. The architecture of that hotel, the architecture over the doors, the frames, the fretwork, everything of that hotel matched what we had already built in Ealing Studios.
Wow.
And so we were like, let's change it.
Fate.
And you could stay there.
And we can stay there, yes.
Partly, of course, it's an exploration of your own history, I guess. You're born in East Africa, in Kenya, Sikh parents. Part of that immigrant movement from the 1970s into the UK, where you grew up. You were in Southall around the time when kind of tensions got intense. You were a member of Rock Against Racism, when that was an emerging thing. All those kind of themes begin to sort of come into your work, don't they?
Oh my God, they are who I am. People always say, God, have you got the energy? How do you keep going? And I think that for me, the idea is that, that if you're going to tell stories, if you're going to be a filmmaker, there has to be a reason why. Why do you do what you do? And I think for me, growing up during that time, when there was terrible strife, terrible racism in the 70s and 80s, and my parents had a shop, so we were subjected to quite a lot of that ugliness. You have this sort of desire to change the world, actually. And although that might sound a bit, loutish, but it is, for me, that's the thing. If I can change people's minds and opinions, and with Bend It Like Beckham, it came out after 9/11, if you remember.
Yeah.
And that film really did change race relations, I think, not only in this country, in a lot of other countries.
And it's the way it changes, isn't it? Because it's by revealing a fresh vision, making us look at something in a new way. One of the great things about that film and Bargee on the Beach was that all of a sudden you presented this experience of Asians in Britain in a way that hadn't really had that mainstream audience before.
Yes, and in fact my new film, which is going to come out in August, Blinded by the Light, is about a Pakistani Muslim kid in Luton.
So Safraz Mansour.
Safraz Mansour's wonderful memoir, Greetings from Berry Park, is the inspiration for it. And this kid is living at the height of Thatcher's second term. And there's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of feeling of no future for kids. There's a sort of very sad sort of, feeling around the country for young people. And he really wants to be a writer, but his parents have got no money, and he needs to go and get a job. But it's through the words of Bruce Springsteen and his lyrics that he finds a way out and finds his voice. Because Bruce was writing about that very kind of environment in New Jersey in the 70s. So again, that film is about the power of bringing people together in a world where a lot of people are trying to divide us.
I love the idea of Bruce Springsteen giving a voice to second-generation British Asians growing up in Luton.
How on earth did you get him involved?
Well, Safraz and I are huge fans of Bruce. We thought we were the only two Asians in Britain that were. He's seen him a lot more times than I have, but that's how we bonded. And then we were very lucky to be... I got invited to the premiere of The Promise at the BFI in 2010, and I took Safraz as my plus one, and we both stood on either side of the red carpet waiting for Bruce to come by.
Stalking him,
yes. We had our cameras, and we were waiting as he went past to click, 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 so we were both in the same frame as him. And we didn't know quite what was going to happen, but I was hoping that I'd be able to somehow, get to talk to him. But in the end, again, I say the big man up there, or the big woman or whatever, had a hand in this, because as Bruce came past us, he saw Safraz and walked over, and he recognises Safraz because there aren't many Pakistanis with an afro who go to his concerts and stand in the front. And he said, I read your book. It's really beautiful. And Safraz just started hyperventilating. He was like, oh my God. And I ran over, and Safraz says, when did you find the time to read it? He said that to him. And I was going, this is my time. This is why I'm going to think about something. I was like this, because I was this close to Bruce, of course. And we were filming as well. I had a video, and so did Safraz. But we've got lots of footage of this, but only of Bruce's chest. Because we're sort of like this. And then I just said, Bruce, I'm so glad you read the book. I'm Gurinder Chadha. I made Bend It Like Beckham. We really want to make a film of this book, but we need your support because it's all your music. Will you help us? Now, that sounds very lucid, but at the time it sort of came out.
Camera to commit to it.
Got him on his chest, yeah. But I'm going, I'm Gurinder Chadha. And then he just looked at us both and went, sounds good. Talk to John. And John Landau, his manager, was behind, and the rest of his management team. We got in touch with them, and that was that. He gave us, yes.
Just take the opportunity when it comes.
You have to grab it.
Well,
yes.
for filmmakers, especially because what you're doing, you're kind of marshalling so many different forces, aren't you? In a very hectic and chaotic environment, you do need to be able to see a clear sense of mission.
Exactly. I think that's true of life, not just as a filmmaker. You have to... The best thing your parents can give you as a child is a sense of purpose and a sense of mission. And that is... really, and you might not know what that is until you're like 60 or something and been through loads of therapy or whatever, but but my mum, my dad, I love my dad, and I've talked endlessly about my dad. He died sadly in an accident 20 odd years ago, but my mum just recently died, and while I was creating Beecham House, in fact, I kept going back and forth from India to see her in hospital and that, but I realised my mum, this world that I create, even though it's in some people's hands, it might be us and them, the divisions, the NF versus, the Pakistanis or whatever, the division. For me, I always create one world, and within that, I try and find a way where both these worlds can come together. And that comes from my mum, because my mum absolutely believed that we're all connected. God is one, Ek Onkar, as she used to say as a Sikh, and that somehow, the most important thing is that we must empathise with each other, because by empathising with each other, we are human. And I think that's where I get that from. I get emotional.
Oh, but is there also sort of tension in that? You have children of your own, you have 12-year-old twins.
Yes.
Is it ever a tension that you're trying to somehow kind of get them into that sort of that vision of the world, but at the same time preserve Indian heritage, preserve identity, those questions of identity too?
Absolutely. I speak Punjabi with my kids, and they're always like, "Mom, don't speak Indian. We don't understand you." And I go, "Time at them this, tu chup karke roti kha," like that. And they're like, "Mom," but it's important too. And I remember this moment on the set of Viceroy's house, and my son, he would have been about 8 then, and we were walking through the refugee camp. I had like 1,000 extras, and we'd set up a refugee camp for partition after partition, and lots of extras were in rags, and it was dirty, it was scruffy, it was smelly, and it was hot as well. And we walked through the set one day, and my son was going, "Mum, when can we go home? Back to Primrose Hill, out of this, it's so dirty and it's so hot, and I want to go home and see my friends." And I said, "See, Ronak, here's the thing. We're telling a story here. It's an important story about your history, about my history. This is what happened to my grandparents, your great-grandparents. They were in a refugee camp like this. And if we don't tell those stories, who's going to tell those stories?" And he turned around and he gave me a big hug. He said, "You're right, Mum. You're right, Mum. I love you, Mum." And for me, in that moment, like a lot of my life, became worthwhile.
Well, that theme of home is an interesting one, and it's going to be sustained through the programme. For the moment, Gurinder Chadha, thanks very much. You can catch Beecham House on ITV tomorrow at 9. And Gurinder's with us, of course, till the end of the programme. Do get in touch with your texts and comments, and you can access us in the usual way.